The fluorescent lights of the roadside diner hummed a weary tune, the kind of sound that gets into your bones and stays there. It was 3 in the morning. Outside, the darkness of Interstate 85 was absolute broken only by the brief, lonely headlights of passing trucks. My coffee had gone cold, a dark, bitter pool in a thick ceramic mug. On the screen of my phone, a news article was glowing. The headline was sensational, designed to provoke outrage. It read, "Family abandons grandmother on highway, how could they?" I scrolled through the comments, my thumb trembling slightly. Hundreds of them, a torrent of righteous anger from strangers. What kind of monsters would do that to their own mother, one person wrote. I hope they rot, said another. That poor, helpless 75-year-old woman. They were talking about a woman in Arizona, a story that had gone viral overnight. But their words felt like they were aimed directly at me. The thing that sent a chill down my spine, a cold deeper than the diner's aggressive air conditioning, wasn't just the cruelty of the story. It was the crushing irony. I was reading it while sitting in the very same rest stop where my son's family had driven off and left me just 3 days before. They thought they had left a helpless old woman behind. A 70-year-old widow who was becoming a burden, an obstacle to their perfect, curated life. They thought I was a problem they had solved. But here's the thing, they didn't know the one crucial detail they had overlooked in their haste to be free of me. I wasn't just a confused old woman they could discard like a piece of trash on the side of the road. I am the woman who still holds the deed to the house they think they own. My name, Eleanor Vance, is the only one on that document. And as I sat there under the hum of those weary lights, a plan began to form. A plan that started with a single cold thought. You think you've made me homeless? You have no idea what's coming. This is the story of how I went from being a roadside victim to the one holding all the cards. It all started 3 days ago with a lie wrapped in a thin blanket of concern. The sun was barely up, casting long, cool shadows across the lawn I had tended with my husband Robert for 40 years. My son David and his wife Susan stood in my doorway with forced, bright smiles that didn't reach their eyes. "Morning, Mom," David said a little too loud. He was a tall man, but he always seemed to shrink in my presence. His shoulders perpetually stooped, as if carrying a weight he couldn't name. Ready for our big trip, Susan, sleek and sharp in her yoga pants and expensive athletic jacket, breezed past me into the hall. Her eyes did a quick, critical scan of my living room, lingering on the worn armchair where Robert used to sit, and the stacks of books threatening to overflow from the shelves. "It's going to be so much fun, Eleanor," she said, her voice smooth as polished stone. "A little adventure for you." I hadn't agreed to any adventure. 2 nights ago, they had come over for dinner, a rare occasion, and cornered me in my own kitchen. They spoke of the Florida sunshine, of beautiful resort-style communities where I wouldn't have to worry about a thing. They called it exploring options. I called it a threat. "The house is just too much for you, Mom," David had said, refusing to meet my gaze, staring instead at a spot on the wall just over my shoulder. "The stairs are a hazard," Susan added, placing a cool hand on my arm. Her touch felt less like comfort and more like a claim. "We worry about you here all alone." They didn't worry. They coveted. They had been living in my house, our house, Robert's and mine, for the past 2 years, ever since David's contracting business had hit a temporary rough patch. They had moved into the upstairs rooms, the ones that had been my daughter's, and then my sewing room. Slowly, their things had bled into the rest of the house. Susan's minimalist gray and white decor clashed with my warm, cluttered life. She'd replaced my floral curtains with stark white blinds and packed away my collection of ceramic birds, calling them dust collectors. Now standing in the doorway with a small suitcase I'd reluctantly packed, I felt a profound sense of dread. "I still don't see why we have to go now, David," I said, my voice quiet. "It's so sudden." "The best time to look is now before the winter rush." Susan answered for him, already directing David to put my bag in the trunk of their oversized SUV. "We found a place online, Sunshine Meadows. It looks just like a 5-star hotel." "You'll love it." I knew I would hate it. I loved this house. I loved the creak of the 3rd step on the staircase, and the way the morning light hit the stained glass window Robert had installed by the landing. I loved the scent of old paper and lemon polish in the study. This house wasn't just wood and nails. It was a living archive of my marriage, of my life. Robert had built the bookshelves with his own hands. We had planted the oak tree in the front yard the day our daughter Sarah was born. Leaving it felt like tearing a part of myself away. In the car, the tension was thick enough to taste. I sat in the back, a passenger in my own life. Susan controlled the radio, a stream of bland pop music I didn't recognize. She had already programmed the GPS, the disembodied voice occasionally announcing a turn with cheerful authority. David drove his knuckles white on the steering wheel. I tried to catch his eye in the rearview mirror. "David," I began. "Well, your father always said he wanted to be carried out of this house feet first. I feel the same way." "Don't be so morbid, Mom," he mumbled, his eyes flicking away. "It's not morbid, it's the truth." I insisted, my voice gaining a little strength. "We built that life together. I'm not ready to put it in a box." Susan sighed from the passenger seat, a long, exaggerated sound of pure impatience. "Eleanor, please. We're doing this for your own good. Think of it as a vacation. You haven't been on a real trip in years. It wasn't a vacation. It was an eviction notice on wheels." I fell silent, watching the familiar streets of my town give way to the anonymous gray ribbon of the highway. For 45 years, David had been my son. I remembered teaching him to ride a bike on the very street we were now leaving behind. I remembered the fierce protective love I felt when he was small. Where had that boy gone? He was lost somewhere inside this silent, anxious man who couldn't even look his own mother in the eye. The hours crawled by. We stopped once for gas and a bathroom break. Susan watched me like a hawk, as if I might make a run for it. She handed me a prepackaged muffin and a bottle of water. "Don't want you getting dehydrated," she said, the words a hollow performance of care. Back in the car, I overheard them whispering in the front seat. I couldn't make out all the words, just fragments. "Can't afford to maintain it," and "the market is perfect right now," and a chilling phrase from Susan. "Once she's settled, it will be so much easier." Settled. Like a stray cat they were dropping off at a shelter. A memory of Robert surfaced so clear and sharp it made my chest ache. We were in our lawyer's office maybe 10 years ago. Robert had been diagnosed, but he was still strong. Still my rock. He was setting up a trust, making sure everything was in order. He turned to me, his hand covering mine. "Ellie," he'd said, his voice rumbling with the certainty I love so much. "This house will always protect you, no matter what." I had smiled, thinking he was just being sweet. I'd trusted that David would of course do the right thing. Robert had been more pragmatic. He saw a weakness in our son that my love had always tried to excuse. He knew David was easily led, especially by a woman as determined as Susan. I wondered now what exactly Robert had put in place. In the fog of grief after he passed, I had let David and his lawyer handle most of the paperwork. They had assured me everything was taken care of, that the house was in the family. I had believed them. It was easier than facing the mountain of legal documents myself. What a fool I'd been. My unease grew with every mile marker we passed. I felt a knot tightening in my stomach. This wasn't just a trip to look at retirement homes. This was a one-way ticket. They were taking me to Florida to leave me there. The brochures, the secretive whispering, David's inability to look at me, it all added up to a conclusion so monstrous I could barely let myself think it. I had to be wrong. This was David, my son. He could be weak and he could be selfish, but he couldn't be this cruel. He couldn't. But Susan could. I glanced at her profile. Her jaw was set, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. She was a woman who got what she wanted. And she wanted my house. She wanted the money from selling it to fund the new, bigger business David dreamed of, to pay for the European vacation she'd been talking about for months, to erase the last trace of me from her life. I was just a stubborn old piece of clutter she needed to clear out. Around lunchtime, the smooth voice from the GPS announced, "In 2 miles, take the exit for the Oakwood Travel Center." Perfect, Susan said, turning around with that same bright, false smile. I'm dying for a decent cup of coffee. How about you, Eleanor? I'm fine. I said, my voice barely a whisper. The knot in my stomach was a cold, hard stone. Nonsense, she chirped. A little break will do us all good. Stretch our legs. David pulled off the highway and into a sprawling complex of gas pumps, a fast food court, and a large convenience store. It was bustling with travelers' families piling out of minivans, truckers, heading in for a hot meal. It was loud and anonymous. A perfect place to get lost. A perfect place to be left behind. David parked the car far from the entrance near a line of semi-trucks. He turned off the engine, and for a moment the only sound was the faint tick of the cooling engine. He still wouldn't look at me. Okay, Susan said, unclipping her seatbelt with a decisive click. Here's the plan. She turned in her seat to face me, her eyes like chips of ice. David and I need to make a quick phone call, a business thing. It's private. Why don't you go inside and grab us all some coffee? Get something for yourself, too. A pastry, maybe. She reached into her purse and pulled out a $20 bill, holding it out to me between two perfectly manicured fingers. The gesture was so dismissive, so demeaning it felt like a slap. I was being sent on an errand like a child. I don't want anything, I said, my pride stirring. Eleanor, don't be difficult, she said, her voice dropping the pretense of kindness. It was flat and hard. Just take the money and get the coffee. We'll be right here. I looked at David. His face was pale, his expression miserable. David, I pleaded, my voice cracking. He finally met my eyes in the rearview mirror just for a second. In them I saw a flicker of shame, a deep, bottomless well of it. Then he looked away, staring out his side window. Go on, Mom, he said, his voice thick. It's fine. We'll wait. His betrayal was in that glance. It was in the way he couldn't hold my gaze. In that moment, I knew. My worst fears weren't just fears. They were the itinerary for the day. My heart felt like it was breaking, not with a loud crack, but with a slow, silent crumbling. Still, a part of me, a foolish, hopeful part, refused to believe it. It clung to the idea that this was all a terrible misunderstanding, so I did as I was told. I took the $20 bill. My fingers felt numb as they brushed against hers. I opened the car door and stepped out into the noise and the diesel fume-laced air. My legs felt unsteady, as if they belonged to someone else. I didn't look back as I walked toward the glass doors of the travel center. I couldn't bear to. I just focused on putting one foot in front of the other, the crumpled bill clutched in my hand like the last remnant of a life that was about to disappear. The inside of the travel center was a sensory assault. The smell of stale coffee, frying hot dogs, and pine-scented cleaner mingled in the air. A cacophony of beeping cash registers, crying children, and a tinny pop song from overhead speakers filled the space. I felt small and invisible amidst the chaotic flow of humanity. People brushed past me, their faces set with the singular focus of travelers. Get in, get what you need, get out. No one noticed the elderly woman standing just inside the entrance, looking utterly lost. My mind was a jumble of denial and dawning horror. They're waiting. They said they would wait. David wouldn't do this. I repeated the words to myself like a mantra, a desperate prayer against the truth that was settling in my gut like a cold stone. I moved through the store in a daze, my feet shuffling over the grimy linoleum. I walked past aisles stacked high with candy chips and garish souvenirs t-shirts that read, "Virginia is for lovers," and cheap plastic snow globes. It all seemed surreal, like a set from a movie I didn't want to be in. I found the coffee station at the back. It was a self-serve affair, with a row of stainless steel carafes and an array of pumps for flavored syrups. The task felt monumental. 3 coffees. Susan likes hers with 1 cream, 1 sugar. David takes his black. I don't even want one. The mechanics of it, the simple act of getting coffee, felt like an anchor to normalcy, a way to prove my fears wrong. If I came back with the coffee and they were there, everything would be okay. It would have all been in my head. I fumbled with the cardboard cups and plastic lids, my hands shaking so badly that I spilled hot coffee on my fingers. The sharp sting of the burn barely registered. Finally, holding a flimsy cardboard tray with 3 cups, I started the long walk back toward the entrance. With every step, my heart pounded harder. Please be there. Please, God, let them be there. I pushed open the glass door and stepped back out into the bright, hazy sunshine. The air was thick with the rumble of idling truck engines. I scanned the area where they had parked. The spot near the line of semi-trucks was empty. My breath caught in my throat. My gaze darted around, desperately searching. Maybe they'd just moved the car closer. Maybe they'd parked on the other side. I walked the entire length of the parking lot, my pace quickening with panic. The coffee sloshed in the cups, scalding my hand through the thin cardboard tray. I didn't care, but their big silver SUV was gone. I stood there in the middle of the sprawling asphalt lot, holding a tray of cooling coffee. The reality hit me not like a wave, but like a physical blow to the chest, knocking the air from my lungs. They were gone. They had actually done it. They had driven away and left me. I stumbled to a concrete bench near the storefront and sank onto it. The coffee tray tipped, and the cups tumbled onto the ground, spilling their dark contents across the pavement in a pathetic, spreading stain. I didn't even watch them fall. My purse was still in the car. My suitcase with the few belongings they'd allowed me to bring was in the car. My medications were in the car. All I had was the clothes on my back, my phone with its dwindling battery, and the crumpled $20 bill from Susan, which now felt like the ultimate insult payment for my own abandonment. For a long time, I just sat there numb. The world moved on around me. Families came and went. Truckers stretched their legs. A man washed his windshield with a squeegee. No one saw me, or if they did, they saw just another old woman resting on a bench, and they looked away, respecting a privacy I no longer had. Shame washed over me hot and suffocating. How could I have been so blind? How could I have raised a son capable of this? I thought of Robert, and a fresh wave of grief sharper than any I had felt since his funeral pierced through me. He would never have let this happen. He would have seen Susan for what she was from the very beginning. He would have protected me. But he was gone, and I had failed to protect myself. After what felt like an eternity, the numbness receded, replaced by a frantic, clawing fear. I was 70 years old, alone at a rest stop in the middle of nowhere. I pulled out my phone. The battery icon was red. 12%. I had to make it count. My first instinct, the one born of a lifetime of being a mother, was to call David. My fingers hovered over his name in my contacts list. Son. The label felt like a lie. I pressed the call button. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Then it went to voicemail. Hi, you've reached David. Leave a message. His voice, so familiar, so casual, was a knife in my heart. I hung up without leaving a message. What would I even say? You forgot your mother. I tried again. Straight to voicemail. He had blocked my number. Or more likely, Susan had. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. I scrolled through my contacts. There were so few names there. Old friends of mine and Robert's, who had passed away or moved to warmer climates. My daughter Sarah had died of cancer 5 years ago. My world had become so small, shrinking until it consisted of only David, Susan, and their daughter Chloe. They were all I had left, and they had thrown me away. I took a deep, shuddering breath. Think, Eleanor. Don't panic. Panic is a luxury you can't afford. I thought of my granddaughter Chloe. She was 14, a quiet, watchful girl who always seemed to be observing the adults around her with a sad, knowing look in her eyes. In the car, she had been silent, staring out the window with her headphones on, but I had caught her looking at me a few times in the rearview mirror, her expression unreadable. Maybe she didn't know. Maybe she could help. I found her number and sent a text, my thumbs clumsy on the small screen. Chloe, honey, it's Grandma. There's been a misunderstanding. Your parents left without me at the rest stop. Can you please tell them to come back? My phone is about to die. I stared at the screen, willing a reply to appear. The 3 little dots materialized, indicating she was typing. A sliver of hope cut through my despair. She was typing. She would help me. Then the dots vanished. No message came. A minute passed. 2, 5. Nothing. I could picture the scene in the car perfectly. Chloe showing the phone to Susan. Susan taking the phone from her, her lips a thin, hard line. "Don't worry about it," she would say. "Your grandmother is just being dramatic. We'll sort it out." And Chloe, a child caught between her parents and her conscience, would retreat back into silence, the silence of complicity. My phone buzzed. It was a text, but not from Chloe. It was from David's number. My heart leaped foolishly. The message read, "Mom, we are so sorry. We got a call about a family emergency with Susan's sister and had to rush off. We totally forgot you were inside. We just now realized. We're too far to turn back now. Find a motel for the night. Stay put. We'll figure something out tomorrow. So sorry." The lies were so blatant, so insulting, it was breathtaking. A family emergency. We forgot. As if I were a library book left on a park bench. It wasn't an apology. It was an alibi, a poorly constructed one at that. The coldness of it, the calculated cruelty finally extinguished the last embers of my grief and sadness. In their place, something new and hard began to form. It was anger. A pure, cold, clarifying anger. They thought I was helpless. They thought I would sit here and cry, wait for them to figure something out. They had underestimated me. They had forgotten who I was. I was not just David's mother. I was Eleanor Vance, a woman who had managed a library for 30 years, who had raised 2 children, who had nursed a dying husband, who had navigated the labyrinth of hospital bureaucracy and insurance claims. I was a woman who knew how to find information. I was a woman who knew how to be patient, and most importantly, I was a woman who had just been pushed too far. My phone screen flickered and went black. The battery was dead. I was truly cut off. But instead of fear, I felt a strange sense of liberation. No more waiting for a call. No more hoping for a text. The lines of communication had been severed, and so had the bonds of family. I was on my own. I looked at the $20 bill still clutched in my hand. It was my only resource. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I stood up from the bench, my back straight. The first step was survival. I needed a safe place for the night. I walked back into the travel center, no longer a victim in a daze, but a woman with a mission. I approached the cashier, a young woman with tired eyes and pink-streaked hair. "Excuse me," I said, my voice clearer and stronger than it had been all day. "Is there a bus station in the nearest town?" The girl looked up surprised by my directness. Yeah, in Oakwood. But the next bus ain't till morning." "Is there a motel nearby within walking distance?" She thought for a moment. "There's a Sleepwell Inn about a mile down the access road. Not the fanciest place, but it's clean." "Thank you," I said. I used $5 of my 20 to buy a bottle of water and a pre-made egg salad sandwich that looked pale and unappetizing. Sustenance. Then I walked out of the travel center and turned onto the access road away from the roaring highway. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The air was cooling. The walk was long and my hip ached with every step, but I didn't slow down. I was no longer running from something. I was walking toward a new beginning. They thought they had left me with nothing. They were wrong. They had left me with a $20 bill and a burning sense of purpose. And they had left me with the memory of my husband's words echoing in my mind with sudden, startling clarity: "This house will always protect you." At that moment, I didn't fully understand what it meant. But as I walked toward the blinking neon sign of the Sleepwell Inn, I knew with an unshakable certainty that I was about to find out. The game had changed. They just didn't know it yet. The Sleepwell Inn was a lie. Sleep was the last thing on the menu. The room I checked into, paid for with a second $5 bill from my dwindling funds, was a small beige box of despair. It smelled faintly of bleach and old cigarette smoke. The bedspread was a thin, scratchy fabric with a pattern of faded brown flowers. Through the thin walls, I could hear the television from the next room, the canned laughter of a sitcom providing a surreal soundtrack to my misery. Outside, the neon sign flickered, casting rhythmic waves of red light across the dingy carpet. I sat on the edge of the stiff mattress and unwrapped my sad little sandwich. I ate it mechanically, not tasting the blandness of the egg salad or the sogginess of the white bread. It was fuel, nothing more. Every bite was a confirmation of my new reality. This was my life now: cheap motels, prepackaged food, and the oppressive weight of being utterly alone. Once the adrenaline of my walk had faded, the cold, hard reality of my situation settled in. The anger that had propelled me here was still present, a hard kernel in my chest, but it was now wrapped in thick layers of fear and a profound, aching sorrow. I was 70 years old. My hip was throbbing. I had $15 to my name. My son, my own flesh and blood, had discarded me as if I were nothing. I lay down on the bed, not bothering to pull back the questionable coverlet. I stared at the stained ceiling, and the years began to peel back. I saw David as a little boy, his face bright with excitement on Christmas morning. I saw him at his high school graduation, so full of promise. I saw him on his wedding day, handsome in his tuxedo, looking at Susan with such adoration. Where had it all gone so wrong? Had I been too soft on him? Had Robert's death removed the last moral compass he possessed? The questions churned in my mind, a merciless vortex of regret and what-ifs. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the image of their silver SUV pulling away, disappearing down the on-ramp, leaving me behind. The betrayal was so complete, so absolute, that it felt like it had rewritten my entire past. All those years of love and sacrifice now seemed like a foolish investment that had yielded nothing but this: a lonely room, a flickering neon sign, and the sound of a stranger's laughter through the wall. Morning came, not with a gentle dawn, but with the harsh glare of sunlight forcing its way through a gap in the cheap vinyl curtains. I hadn't slept. I felt ancient, my body stiff, and my mind exhausted. I knew I couldn't stay here. My $15 wouldn't even cover another night in this drab purgatory. I washed my face in the small, cracked sink using a bar of soap that was the size of a domino. Looking in the mirror was a mistake. The woman staring back at me was a stranger. Her eyes were hollow, her hair was a mess, and the lines on her face seemed to have deepened overnight. But beneath the fear, I saw a flicker of something else. The hard kernel of anger was still there. It was the only thing holding me together. I had one goal, one desperate practical need. I had to charge my phone. My phone was my only link to the world I had left behind, my only tool to fight my way back. And the only place I knew that would have public outlets was the place I dreaded returning to, the Oakwood Travel Center. Walking back down the access road in the morning light felt different. I was no longer fueled by the initial shock. Now, it was a grim march of necessity. When I entered the travel center, it was just as chaotic as the day before. This time, I navigated the crowds with a singular purpose. I found the diner section a collection of vinyl booths and formica tables. I scanned the walls and spotted what I was looking for, a power outlet near a small two-person booth in the corner. I slid into the booth and took out my dead phone and its charging cord. I ordered a single cup of coffee from a waitress who looked as tired as I felt. It cost $2.50 plus tax. I was down to my last $12. As the waitress walked away, I carefully plugged my phone into the wall. The screen lit up, showing the battery symbol with a lightning bolt through it. 0%. It was a start. I nursed that coffee for over an hour, taking tiny, infrequent sips to make it last. I felt the eyes of the staff on me, the unspoken pressure to order more or leave. But I held my ground. This small booth, this power outlet, was my territory. I wasn't leaving until my phone had enough life in it. I must have been a sorry sight. An old woman in yesterday's clothes huddled in a corner, staring intently at a charging phone as if it were a holy relic. Most people walked by without a second glance, but one person noticed. He was a man sitting a few booths away. I'd vaguely registered him when I sat down, a trucker by the looks of him. He was big, with a kind, weathered face, a gray-flecked beard, and a baseball cap that read, Carter Hauling. He had been quietly eating a large plate of pancakes, and now he was finishing his coffee, reading a paperback novel. Our eyes met for a brief second. I looked away quickly, taught by a lifetime of not engaging with strange men. But his gaze wasn't threatening. It was observant. A few minutes later, as my waitress passed by, he flagged her down. I heard him say something in a low voice and gesture in my direction. My stomach clenched. I thought he was complaining about me telling her to kick me out for loitering. But a moment later, the waitress appeared at my table with a fresh, steaming pot of coffee. "Your coffee, ma'am," she said, topping off my cup. "Oh, I didn't," I began, confused. She nodded toward the trucker's booth. "It's on him." I looked over at the man. He caught my eye again and gave me a small, respectful nod, a gesture that said, "I'm not trying to bother you." He then went back to his book. It was such a small act of kindness, but in my state, it felt monumental. It was the first gesture of human decency I had received in days. It broke through the wall of ice that had formed around my heart. My eyes stung with tears, and I had to blink them back fiercely. I would not cry here. I waited until my phone reached 25%. It felt like enough. I unplugged it, left $1 for the waitress on the table, and stood up. On my way out, I stopped at the trucker's booth. "Thank you for the coffee," I said, my voice a little hoarse. He looked up from his book, and his eyes were even kinder up close. They were blue and crinkled at the corners. "No problem at all," he said, his voice a low, gentle rumble. "You looked like you could use it." He gestured to the empty seat opposite him. "You got a minute? You look like you're carrying the weight of the world." Ordinarily, I would have made a polite excuse and left, but something about him felt safe, and I was so tired of being alone with my thoughts. I hesitated for a second, then slid into the booth. "My name's Ben," he said, extending a calloused hand. "Eleanor," I replied, shaking it. His grip was firm and warm. "Tough day, Eleanor?" he asked gently. The simple, direct question disarmed me. I didn't give him the whole sordid story. I couldn't. The shame was still too raw. You could say that I said, looking down at my hands. My family and we got separated. The euphemism hung in the air between us. Ben didn't press. He just nodded slowly, his expression full of a wisdom that only comes from thousands of miles on the road and a lifetime of observation. "The road can do that," he said, his voice free of judgment. "It can separate folks in all sorts of ways." He took a sip of his own coffee. "Are you stranded?" "Yes," I admitted, the word tasting like ash. "My purse, my phone, well, my phone is working again for now. Everything else is with them. And they're not coming back," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. He had seen it in my eyes. I just shook my head, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. Ben was silent for a moment, letting me have my space. Then he said, "Well, first things first, you need a hot meal, not just coffee." Before I could protest, he'd already signaled the waitress. "And you need a full charge on that phone. That's your lifeline." He reached into a worn canvas bag next to him and pulled out a small black rectangle. "Here. It's a power bank. I keep a few of them charged up. Take it. It'll give you 3 full charges." He slid it across the table. It felt heavy in my hand, a solid practical object. It was a gift of self-sufficiency, a gift of power. I can't take this," I stammered. "Yes, you can," he said firmly but gently. "My mother always said the world runs on people helping each other out when they're in a tight spot. Looks to me like you're in a tight spot." He looked me straight in the eye. "Whatever happened, Eleanor, it's not your fault. You look like a good person. Sometimes bad things happen to good people." His unconditional belief in me, a complete stranger, was more healing than he could ever know. He ordered me a full breakfast, eggs, bacon, toast, the works. And as I ate, he didn't pry. He just talked. He told me about his route from Florida up to Maine. He told me about his own daughter who was in college studying to be a veterinarian. He treated me not as a pathetic old woman, but as an equal. He gave me back a piece of my dignity. When I was finished, my phone was at 50% and still charging from his power bank. My stomach was full for the first time in days, and my mind was clear. The fear was still there, but it no longer had a chokehold on me. Ben's kindness had been the catalyst. It had reminded me that my son and daughter-in-law were the anomaly, not the norm. There was still goodness in the world. And now, it was time to harness my own strength. Ben, I said, my voice steady, you've done more for me than you can imagine. I need to make a phone call, a very important one. He nodded, understanding. You do what you need to do. I pulled out my phone. My fingers didn't tremble this time. I scrolled through my contacts past David's name, past Chloe's. I went all the way down to J for Jenkins. Sarah Jenkins, attorney at law. The young woman who had taken over the family practice after her father retired. The firm that Robert and I had used for decades. The firm that had set up my trust. As I pressed the call button, a memory of Robert came flooding back clearer than ever. His hand on mine in that lawyer's office. His voice full of love and foresight. This house will always protect you. I was finally ready to find out what he meant. The phone rang twice before a crisp professional voice answered. Jenkins Law, how may I direct your call? I'd like to speak with Sarah Jenkins, please. I said, my voice steady. My name is Eleanor Vance. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint sound of keyboard clicks. Mrs. Vance, of course. I'll put you right through. A moment later, Sarah's voice came on the line, warm and energetic. Eleanor, it's so good to hear from you. Is everything all right? Her simple question, filled with genuine concern, almost undid me. But I held on, gripping the phone tightly. Hello, Sarah. I'm afraid everything is very much not all right. I gave her the abridged version of the story. I didn't dwell on the emotional devastation. I focused on the facts. The trip to Florida, the stop at the travel center, the abandonment. I told her I was in a town called Oakwood, Virginia, with $12 and a portable phone charger given to me by a kind stranger. I spoke with a detached calmness that surprised even myself. It was as if I were recounting a story that had happened to someone else. Sarah was silent throughout my telling, a testament to her professionalism. When I finished, she didn't offer platitudes or expressions of shock. She got straight to business. Eleanor, are you in a safe place right now? Yes, I said. I'm at the diner where I was left. Okay. First, I'm wiring you $500 via Western Union. The nearest branch is likely in the town of Oakwood. That will give you some breathing room. Don't argue, she said, cutting off the protest I was about to make. This is a retainer for my services drawn from the funds of your trust. We can sort out the details later. Right now, your safety and stability are paramount. The mention of the trust sent a jolt through me. The trust, I repeated, my mind racing. Sarah, that's why I'm calling. My husband, Robert. Years ago, we met with your father. About the house. He set something up. A trust. He said the house would always protect me. My voice faltered for the first time. David and Susan, they live there. They believe they own it. To be honest, in the confusion after Robert passed, I thought they did too. I signed some papers. I remember that trust very well. Sarah said, her voice sharpening with focus. My father called it his Ironclad Widow's Protection Plan. Let me pull up the file. Give me 1 minute. The minute stretched into an eternity. Ben sat across from me, patiently sipping his coffee, giving me the privacy of his silence. I stared out the diner window at the endless parade of trucks on the highway, my entire future hanging in the balance. What if I was wrong? What if I had misunderstood Robert? What if in my grief I had signed away my only asset, my only leverage? Okay, Eleanor, I have it, Sarah said, her voice now electric, with something I couldn't quite decipher. I have the master file right here, the Robert and Eleanor Vance Revocable Living Trust. She paused, and I could hear her flipping through pages. Good Lord, your husband was a very smart man. My heart hammered against my ribs. What does it say, Sarah? It says, she began her words slow and deliberate, that upon the death of one spouse, the trust becomes irrevocable. You, Eleanor, became the sole trustee. The sole, I repeat, sole beneficiary of the trust during your lifetime. You have complete and total control over all assets within it, including the house. I sank back against the vinyl booth, the air leaving my lungs in a rush. Sole trustee, yes. The papers you signed after Robert's death simply affirmed your position as trustee. David is listed, but only as a successor beneficiary. He and his issue, meaning Chloe, only inherit the assets of the trust after you pass away. Until then, he has absolutely no legal claim or control. None. The words washed over me a wave of stunning, unbelievable relief. I hadn't been a fool. Robert had protected me. Even from beyond the grave, he had been my rock. So, the house, I whispered. The house is yours, Eleanor Sarah said, her voice ringing with clarity. 100% yours. Legally, David and Susan are tenants. Tenants who I assume are not paying rent. No, I said, a dry, humorless laugh escaping my lips. No, they are not paying rent. Then they have no legal right to be there if you want them gone, Sarah stated simply. The full weight of her words settled upon me. The power. The stunning absolute power I now held. They had left me stranded, believing I was a helpless old woman who they could institutionalize and whose home they could sell to fund their lifestyle. But they were living in my house. They were sleeping in my bed. Their entire life was built on a foundation that I owned, and they had just tried to bulldoze the owner. A new feeling bloomed inside me, pushing aside the fear and the sorrow. It was a cold, hard, diamond-bright resolve. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about justice. What do you want to do? Eleanor Sarah asked gently, sensing the shift in my silence. We can start with a formal letter demanding they cease contact and arrange for your safe return. We can... No, I said, my voice low and firm. The woman who had been weeping into a lumpy motel pillow just hours ago was gone. In her place was someone I hadn't met before. Someone forged in the fire of betrayal and tempered by the kindness of a stranger. No, that's not what I want to do. I took a deep breath. I want to sell the house. There was another pause on Sarah's end, but this time it was one of surprise and perhaps admiration. Sell the house, yes, I said. I want to list it for sale. Immediately. Eleanor, that is. A significant step. Are you sure? I have never been more sure of anything in my life, Sarah, I replied. That house is a mausoleum of memories, and they have desecrated every single one of them. I can't live there anymore. I won't. I want to sell it, and I want to use the money to build a new life for myself. A life that doesn't include them. I could almost hear Sarah smiling through the phone. All right, then. Let's sell the house. I know an excellent real estate agent in your area, a real shark. I can have her at the property for an assessment by tomorrow morning. We can have a for sale sign on the lawn by the afternoon. The image was so delicious, so potent that I nearly laughed out loud. The thought of Susan with her obsession with appearances and what the neighbors thought coming home to a giant sign on the front lawn of the house she thought she owned. There's one more thing, Sarah, I said, remembering the final piece of Robert's wisdom, the trust document. Is there any clause in there about David's responsibilities as a son? I heard more page turning. Let me see. Ah, here it is. Section 4B, subsection C. It's a filial responsibility clause. Your husband was thorough. It states that for David to remain the successor beneficiary in good standing, he must provide reasonable care, comfort, and respect to you for the duration of your life. Failure to do so, as determined by the trustee that's you, Eleanor, could be grounds for him to be disinherited. Disinherited. The word was a thunderclap. By abandoning me on the side of a highway, David hadn't just been cruel. He had been monumentally stupid. He hadn't just gambled with my well-being. He had gambled with his entire inheritance and lost. Thank you, Sarah, I said, a sense of profound calm power settling over me. Please proceed with the realtor. I'll wait for your instructions about the money. I'll call you back within the hour with the details for the wire transfer. Find a decent hotel, Eleanor. Get a comfortable room. Have a nice dinner. The trust can certainly afford it. This is your war chest. We said our goodbyes, and I ended the call. I looked at the power bank Ben had given me then at my phone, which was now at 78%. These were my weapons, kindness and communication. I looked across the table at Ben, who had been watching me with a curious, supportive expression. Good news, he asked. I smiled a real, genuine smile. The first one in days, the best news, I said. It turns out my son made a very, very big mistake. Ben grinned a wide, crinkly-eyed grin. I love it when bullies get what's coming to them. He pushed his chair back and stood up, grabbing his bag. My route takes me south. I'm headed back toward Florida. But I've got a feeling you're not going that way anymore. No, I said, standing up as well. I'm not. You take care of yourself, Eleanor Vance, he said. He wrote a number on a napkin. That's my cell. If you ever find yourself in a tight spot again, or just want to let me know that you landed on your feet, you call me. I will, Ben, I said, my voice thick with emotion. Thank you for everything. He just tipped his cap and walked out of the diner, disappearing back into the world of highways and long hauls, a passing angel in a trucker hat. I knew I would never forget him. He had been the bridge between Eleanor the victim and Eleanor the victor. I picked up the Western Union details from Sarah retrieved the cash and found the nicest hotel in Oakwood. It wasn't the Ritz, but the bed was clean, the shower was hot, and there was no flickering neon sign. I ordered room service a proper steak dinner and ate it while sitting propped up against fluffy pillows. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles to the south, David and Susan were probably lounging by a pool at Sunshine Meadows, sipping cocktails, congratulating themselves on their cleverness. They were celebrating their freedoms, secure in the knowledge that they had solved their mom problem. They had no idea that a storm was gathering. They had no idea that a for sale sign was about to be hammered into their perfect lawn. They thought they had taken my home. They were about to find out they didn't even have one. For the next 2 days, I lived in a strange state of limbo. The hotel room in Oakwood became my command center. It was clean, anonymous, and blessedly quiet. It was the perfect blank slate on which to sketch the blueprint of my new life. I spent the time speaking with Sarah multiple times a day, the phone calls acting as the scaffolding for my burgeoning independence. Sarah was magnificent. She moved with the speed and precision of a military commander. She had, as promised, engaged a realtor named Margaret, a woman whose voice on the phone was a brisk, no-nonsense staccato of confidence. Margaret had done a drive-by appraisal the day after my call, confirming that the market was, in her words, hotter than a $2 pistol. The house, with its large yard and prime location in a desirable school district, was a gem. They've let the garden go a bit, Margaret reported back to me via Sarah, and the interior will need a good decluttering from what I can see through the windows. The gray paint is dreary, but the bones are excellent. We can list it high. The thought of Susan's sterile gray walls being judged as dreary brought a grim smile to my face. While Sarah and Margaret laid the groundwork for the sale, I focused on myself. I used the money Sarah had wired to buy new clothes, simple, comfortable things that felt like my own. A few pairs of slacks, some soft cotton blouses, new underwear. The act of shedding the clothes I'd been abandoned in and putting on something fresh felt like a baptism. I was washing away the victim and dressing the survivor. I even went to a salon and had my hair washed and styled. It was a small thing, an indulgence, but it made me feel powerful. It made me feel like Eleanor Vance again, not just a forgotten old woman. I didn't allow myself to think too much about David. When his face floated into my mind, I pushed it away. Thinking of him brought the ache back, the deep primal wound of a mother's love betrayed. To succeed, I needed to be clear-headed. I needed the cold, hard anger, not the debilitating sorrow. The time for sorrow would come later. Right now, it was time for action. The plan was set for Friday afternoon, 3 days after I had been left at the rest stop. It was the day David and Susan were scheduled to drive back from Florida. Margaret, the realtor, had a court order arranged by Sarah that granted her access to the property to take photographs and place the sign. The timing was exquisite. On Friday morning, a nervous energy crackled through me. This was it, the point of no return. I sat in my hotel room, a cup of tea growing cold in my hands, and pictured the scene. The realtor's car pulling up. The locksmith efficiently changing the locks. The hammering of the for sale sign into the soft earth of the lawn Robert and I had so carefully cultivated. Around noon, Sarah called me. It's done, she said, her voice tight with suppressed excitement. Margaret is at the house now. The locks have been changed. The sign is on the lawn. The sign I breathed, closing my eyes. I could see it perfectly, a bold professional sign declaring to the entire neighborhood, to the world, that this chapter of my life was over. I've just sent the email, Sarah continued, to both David's and Susan's personal email addresses. The subject line is official notice to vacate property at 124 Chestnut Lane. What does it say? I asked, my heart thrumming. It's very formal, Sarah explained. It informs them as tenants at will that their indefinite tenancy is terminated. It cites my legal authority as counsel for the property owner and trustee, Eleanor Vance. It gives them 30 days to vacate the premises, as required by state law. It also informs them that the property is now officially on the market, and that any attempt to interfere with the sale will be met with swift legal action. I attached a photo of the for sale sign on the lawn as a PDF. It was perfect. It was cold, legal, and undeniable. It left no room for argument or emotional manipulation. It was a declaration of war delivered not with a shout, but with the quiet, devastating click of a send button. Now we wait, Sarah said. The waiting was the hardest part. I knew they would be on the road, probably somewhere in North Carolina by now, cruising along with the radio on, completely oblivious. The email would sit in their inboxes, a digital time bomb waiting for them to stop for gas or food and check their phones. I tried to read, but the words on the page blurred. I tried to watch television, but the cheerful inanity of the programs felt insulting. So I just sat and stared out the window, watching the clouds drift by my thoughts, hundreds of miles away, hovering over a silver SUV on Interstate 95. The call came at 4:17 p.m. The caller ID flashed Son. My breath hitched. For a terrifying second, the old maternal instinct surged the urge to answer, to soothe, to fix. Then I looked at the new sensible blouse I was wearing. I thought of the cold motel room and the kindness of Ben Carter. I remembered the chilling dismissive text message, "We'll figure something out tomorrow." I silenced the call. A moment later, a text message appeared. From David. "Mom, what the hell is this email? Call me now." The raw panic in the words was satisfying, but I didn't reply. A second call. I silenced it again. A third immediately after. Silenced. Then the phone rang again. This time, the ID was Susan's. I let it ring until it went to voicemail, the sound echoing in the quiet hotel room. The texts started flooding in a frantic cascade of disbelief, anger, and dawning terror. They came from both of their phones, a chaotic duet of desperation. From David, "Mom, this is insane. What have you done? Pick up the phone." From Susan, "Eleanor, I don't know what kind of sick game you're playing, but you need to stop it right now. Call Sarah Jenkins and tell her to take that sign down. You are embarrassing the family. Embarrassing the family." The sheer audacity of it stole my breath. They leave me for dead on the side of a highway, and I'm the one causing embarrassment. The last vestiges of my maternal guilt evaporated in a flash of white-hot fury. From David. "This isn't your house, Mom. We talked about this. The paperwork was all sorted. You can't do this." The lie was so bald, so pathetic. They were flailing, grasping at a reality they had invented for themselves. I didn't respond to any of them. My silence was my new weapon. Every unanswered call, every ignored text, was a confirmation that the balance of power had irrevocably shifted. They were used to me being the one who was waiting, anxious, dependent. Now they were the ones in the dark, screaming into a void. Sarah had coached me on this. "Do not engage," she'd instructed. "Let them panic. Let them spin. Any communication will now go through my office. You are the queen on the chessboard. You don't get your hands dirty." An hour later, an email landed in my inbox, forwarded from Sarah. It was from Susan. The tone had shifted from anger to a kind of snarling disbelief. "Ms. Jenkins," it began, the italics dripping with contempt. "I am writing to inform you that you are acting on behalf of a confused and vindictive old woman. Eleanor Vance is not in her right mind. She is suffering from dementia and is clearly being manipulated. The house at 124 Chestnut Lane belongs to my husband. We have allowed his mother to live there out of the goodness of our hearts. This action is illegal and slanderous. Remove the sign and the listing immediately, or we will see you in court." I laughed, a real full-throated laugh. It was the sound of a dam breaking, confused and vindictive. Oh, I wasn't confused, but vindictive I was just getting started. Sarah's reply, which she had also copied me on, was a masterpiece of legal steel. "Ms. Vance," she wrote, "thank you for your email. Please be advised that any claims regarding my client's mental state are baseless and defamatory. Mrs. Vance is of perfectly sound mind, a fact I can attest to personally, and am prepared to prove with medical evaluations should you be foolish enough to pursue that path. The legal standing of the trust is ironclad and a matter of public record. My client is the sole trustee. The notice to vacate is legal and binding. Any attempt on your part to remain in the residence past the 30-day notice period will result in eviction proceedings, and we will seek to have all associated legal fees assigned to you. All future correspondence should be directed to my office." It was a checkmate. I could picture them in their car, the beautiful Florida scenery a blur outside their windows. The fun was over. The triumphant return had turned into a desperate, frantic race back to a life that was crumbling around them. The silence in that car must have been deafening, punctuated by furious accusations and panicked whispers. Who had screwed up? Who was to blame? The truth was they both were. David, for his weakness and moral cowardice. Susan, for her greed and cruelty. They were a perfect storm of dysfunction, and they had aimed that storm at me. They just never imagined I would become the eye of it, calm, controlled, and directing the destructive winds right back at them. That evening, I didn't just order room service. I went down to the hotel's restaurant. I sat at a table by myself, ordered a glass of expensive wine, and savored my steak. I was no longer hiding. For the first time in years, I felt completely and utterly free. I was not David's burden or Susan's obstacle. I was Eleanor Vance, a woman of means, a property owner, a client of a sharp-as-a-tack lawyer. They thought they had taken everything from me on that desolate stretch of I-85. They thought they had left me with nothing but a $20 bill and a broken heart. But they had been wrong. They had left me with a gift I never knew I needed the motivation to take my life back. And as I raised my wine glass in a silent toast to my own reflection in the window, I knew this was only the beginning. The homecoming was going to be quite the show. The drive home was something I both dreaded and anticipated. I hired a car service paid for by the trust, a quiet, comfortable sedan that was a world away from the tense, hostile environment of David's SUV. As the driver navigated the familiar highways, taking me back toward the life I had been so violently ejected from, I felt a strange mix of emotions. There was a grim satisfaction, a sense of purpose. But underneath it, the sorrow I had kept at bay for days began to seep back in. This wasn't a triumphant parade. It was a funeral procession for the family I thought I had. Every mile brought me closer to the final confrontation, the moment I would have to look my son in the eye and see not the boy I raised, but the man who had abandoned me. I had arranged to arrive 2 days after the sign went up, giving them ample time to drive back from Florida and stew in the consequences of their actions. I would not be going to the house. That was no longer my home. It was a property, an asset to be liquidated. Instead, I had booked a suite at a nice hotel in the center of town, a neutral ground for the storm that was about to break. Sarah had kept me updated. The initial flurry of angry texts from David and Susan had subsided, replaced by a desperate, panicked silence. They had tried to call Sarah's office a dozen times, but she had instructed her paralegal to inform them that all communication must be in writing. Their powerlessness was a palpable thing, a frantic buzzing on the other end of a phone line they could no longer use to their advantage. When I checked into my hotel suite, the first thing I did was call Margaret, the realtor. "Hello, Eleanor," she said, her brisk voice a welcome tonic. "I trust your journey was comfortable." "It was, thank you, Margaret. How are things on your end, Lively?" she replied with a dry chuckle. "The listing went live online yesterday afternoon. We've already had 17 inquiries and 3 requests for a showing. People are chomping at the bit. The photos came out beautifully, by the way. I had my team do some digital decluttering. It looks like a whole new house." I felt a pang, a ghost of the life that had been. My clutter, Robert's books, my sewing baskets, the photos on the mantelpiece was what had made it a home. Now it was just a product staged and sterile for strangers' eyes, but it was a necessary pain. And "Have you had any contact with the current occupants?" I asked, my voice tight. "Oh, yes," Margaret said. "They arrived home late last night. I can only imagine what a scene that must have been. The husband, David, he called my office this morning. He was emotional. He alternated between threatening to sue me for trespassing and begging me to take the listing down. I informed him politely but firmly that I was acting on the explicit instructions of the property owner and that any further harassment would be reported to the authorities." She paused. His wife got on the phone then. She was less polite. I could only imagine. "Thank you, Margaret. Keep me informed." The confrontation I was bracing for came sooner than I expected. Sarah had arranged a meeting for the following day at her office, but David and Susan couldn't wait. That evening, there was a sharp, insistent knock on my hotel room door. I hadn't told them where I was staying, but I underestimated Susan's ferocious determination when her lifestyle was threatened. She must have called every hotel in town. I looked through the peephole. It was them. David looked haggard, his face pale and drawn. Susan stood beside him, her arms crossed tightly, her expression a mask of pure fury. My first instinct was to ignore them to call security, but Sarah's words echoed in my mind. "You are the queen on the chessboard. A queen does not hide. She holds her ground." I took a deep breath, straightened my back, and opened the door. I didn't open it fully, just enough to block the entrance with my body. I said nothing. I just looked at them. The sight of me calm, well-dressed, standing in the doorway of an expensive hotel room seemed to momentarily stun them into silence. They had expected to find a crumpled, weeping wreck. They had expected to find the helpless woman they had left behind. They were not prepared for the woman standing before them. David found his voice first. It was a choked, desperate sound. "Mom! Thank God! We were so worried." "What is going on? We need to talk." "There is nothing for us to talk about, David," I said, my voice as cool and level as a frozen lake. Susan pushed past him, her eyes blazing. "Don't you dare take that tone with us, Eleanor. After what you've done, changing the locks, putting a sign on our lawn, our neighbors are all talking." "It's humiliating, is it?" I asked, my eyebrows raised slightly. "More humiliating than being abandoned at a rest stop 300 miles from home?" The direct hit landed. Susan flinched, as if I'd slapped her. David's face crumpled. "Mom, it wasn't like that," he stammered, the pathetic lie sounding even weaker in person. "We told you there was an emergency." "Stop," I said, and the single word had so much force behind it that they both fell silent. "Do not insult my intelligence with that lie again. Not ever. I have the text message, Susan, the one you sent from David's phone. The one that was so cold it could have frozen fire." Susan's face hardened, her fury returning. "This is about money, isn't it? You were always so tight with your money, even with your own family." "No, Susan, this is not about money," I said, my gaze unwavering. "This is about respect. It's about dignity. It's about the fact that you looked at me, the woman whose roof you were living under, and saw nothing more than a piece of furniture you could haul to the curb when it became inconvenient." I shifted my gaze to my son, and this time the sorrow broke through. My voice cracked. "I looked in your eyes in that car, David. I saw the shame. You knew what you were doing was wrong, and you did it anyway. That's the part I will never understand or forgive." Tears welled in his eyes. They were real tears, I could see that. But they were the tears of self-pity, not remorse. "What were we supposed to do?" he cried, his voice rising. "We're drowning. The business is failing. We have debts. We needed the equity in the house. We were going to get you a beautiful place in Florida. You needed the equity in my house." I corrected him softly. "And you were not going to get me a beautiful place. You were going to dump me in the cheapest one you could find and use the rest of the money to save yourself. You decided that your financial comfort was more important than my life." "That's not true," he wailed. "Isn't it?" I countered. "You drove away. That is the one undeniable truth in all of this. You drove away." I let the words hang in the air, a final damning verdict. Susan, seeing that her aggression and David's theatrics were failing, changed tactics. She tried to soften her expression to manufacture a look of concern. Eleanor, she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. You're upset. We understand. We made a mistake. A terrible mistake. But we're still a family. We can fix this. Just call off the lawyers. Take down the sign. Let us come home. We can talk it all through. It was a masterful performance, but I was no longer her audience. I saw the cold calculation behind her eyes. The time for talking is over, Susan, I said. The meeting is tomorrow at 10 a.m. at Sarah Jenkins's office. If you want to say anything else, you can say it there. I began to close the door. David put his hand out to stop it, his face a mess of tears and desperation. Mom, please don't do this to us. Where will we go? What will we do? I looked at my son, my broken, hollowed-out son, and I felt a flicker of something that might have once been pity, but it was buried under the bedrock of his betrayal. I don't know, David, I said, my voice quiet and final. You'll have to figure something out. That's what you told me to do. And with that, I closed the door, shutting it firmly on their shocked faces. I leaned against the solid wood, the sound of the deadbolt sliding into place echoing the closing of a chapter of my life. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I just felt a profound, quiet emptiness. The final cord had been cut. I was truly, completely on my own, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a curse. It felt like a clean slate. The conference room at Jenkins Law was all sleek wood and cool leather, a neutral arena designed for conflict resolution. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I sat on one side of the long, polished table with Sarah beside me. She was a picture of calm competence, a file folder laid neatly before her. I felt a sense of stillness I hadn't known was possible. The storm had raged inside me for days, but now at its epicenter, I was quiet. David and Susan sat opposite us. They looked like they hadn't slept. David's eyes were red-rimmed and puffy, and he kept running his hands through his unkempt hair. Susan was impeccably dressed as always in a sharp blazer, but her armor was cracking. Her face was tight with strain, and a muscle jumped in her jaw. They didn't have a lawyer with them. It was a foolish, arrogant move, a sign that they still believed on some level that this was a family squabble they could win through emotional manipulation. Sarah began the meeting. "Thank you for coming," she said, her tone formal and devoid of warmth. "The purpose of this meeting is to clarify the terms of my client's decision and to ensure a smooth transition. As you know, Mrs. Vance has listed the property at 124 Chestnut Lane for sale. The 30-day notice to vacate is firm and non-negotiable." Susan spoke first, her voice sharp and brittle. "This is ridiculous. We have rights." "Actually, you don't," Sarah countered smoothly, not even glancing down at her notes. "You were tenants at will in a property owned by the Vance Trust. The trustee has terminated that tenancy. Your only right is to the legally mandated 30-day notice period, which my client has graciously provided. You will be expected to vacate the premises, leaving it in broom-clean condition, by the 30th of next month." "And if we don't," Susan challenged, her eyes flashing. "Then on the 31st, Sarah said, her voice dropping to a steely quiet, "the sheriff will escort you out. I assure you, it's not a pleasant experience. And all costs incurred will be billed to you." The threat hung in the air, stark and ugly. David slumped in his chair as if the air had been let out of him. He turned to me, his face pleading. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking, "how can you do this? It's our home. It was my home, David," I said, my voice soft but unyielding. "It was the home I built with your father. The home I thought I would live in until I died. You and Susan turned it into a house, and then into an asset. You were the ones who decided it was no longer a home. You just forgot to tell me." "We made a mistake," he cried, leaning forward, his hands clasped on the table. "A horrible, terrible mistake. I know that now. I was scared, Mom. I was weak. Susan." He glanced at his wife, a flicker of resentment in his eyes. "She convinced me it was the only way. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for everything. Please just give us another chance." His apology, so long in coming, felt hollow. It was a deathbed confession offered only when the executioner was at the door. Before I could respond, Susan erupted. "Oh, don't you dare, David. Don't you dare put this on me. You were just as worried about the money as I was. You were the one complaining day and night about the cost of maintaining the house, about your mother's needs. The facade of their marriage crumbled right there in the sunlit conference room. The blame, the resentment, the years of quiet corrosion were suddenly on full display. They began arguing, their voices rising, forgetting where they were, all pretense of a united front gone. "I never wanted to leave her like that," David shouted. "You didn't seem to have a problem with it when you were driving the car," Susan shot back. I held up a hand. The gesture was small, but my silence had a weight to it now. They both stopped turning to look at me, their faces flushed with anger and shame. "It doesn't matter who drove the car," I said quietly. "You were both in it, and you both left me behind." I took a deep breath, and then I delivered the final fatal blow. I looked at Sarah. "Sarah, would you please explain the final clause of the trust, the one we discussed?" Sarah nodded grimly. She opened the folder in front of her. "As we discussed, the Vance Revocable Living Trust contains a standard but very specific filial responsibility clause." She looked directly at David. "Section 4B, subsection C. It stipulates that for you to remain the successor beneficiary, you must provide, and I quote, reasonable care, comfort, and respect to your mother Eleanor Vance for the duration of her life." A look of dawning horror spread across David's face. He finally understood. This was about more than the house. Sarah continued, her voice clear and precise as a surgeon's scalpel. "The trustee, your mother, has the sole authority to determine if that clause has been breached. Abandoning a 70-year-old woman, your mother at a highway rest stop hundreds of miles from home, cutting off contact, and causing her severe emotional and physical distress, is, in my professional opinion, a catastrophic breach of that clause." She let the words sink in. Susan's face had gone pale, her lipstick a slash of garish color against her ashen skin. "Therefore," Sarah concluded, closing the folder with a soft final thud, "Mrs. Vance has instructed me to execute her right as trustee. David Vance, you are hereby formally disinherited from the Vance Trust. You have forfeited your right to any and all assets upon your mother's passing. The trust will be amended to name a new beneficiary." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a world ending. David stared at me, his mouth agape. He looked utterly broken, a little boy who had just been told that everything he thought was his had vanished. "Mom, no," he whispered. "You can't. Everything. Dad's workshop, the stocks, everything, everything." "David," I confirmed, my voice full of a sorrow that was for the first time for him, for the man he had failed to become. "Your father put that clause in to protect me. He trusted you to do the right thing. You broke his trust and you broke mine." Susan finally found her voice, a strangled, venomous hiss. "You are a monster, a cruel, vindictive old woman. To do this to your own son." "No, Susan," I said, meeting her hateful gaze without flinching. "I am a mother who finally realized that my son is a 45-year-old man who is responsible for his own choices. And I am a woman who has decided to choose herself." The meeting was over. There was nothing more to say. They sat there shattered as Sarah and I stood up and walked out of the room. In the weeks that followed, the house sold quickly and for more than the asking price. I never set foot in it again. Margaret handled everything. I used the proceeds to buy a beautiful sun-filled condominium in a vibrant retirement community, one with a pool, a library, and social activities. It was a place I chose for myself. The furniture was all new. I didn't take a single thing from the old house except for a box of photographs and Robert's favorite armchair. I placed it by the window in my new living room, overlooking a garden filled with roses. David and Susan's marriage, built on a foundation of mutual greed, did not survive the loss of their expected fortune. They sold their cars, rented a small, bleak apartment, and eventually divorced. The last I heard, David was working for another contractor, living paycheck to paycheck. He tried to call a few more times, leaving rambling, tearful voicemails. I never answered. But the story doesn't end with their ruin. It ends with my rebirth. One afternoon, a few months after I had moved in, I received a tentative, hesitant text message. "Grandma, it's Chloe. I just wanted to know if you are okay." My heart, which I thought had been hardened forever, felt a small, painful pinch. She was a child caught in her parents' toxic wake. I thought for a long time before replying. "I am more than okay, my dear," I typed. "I am happy." It was the beginning of a new, fragile connection, one that we would build slowly, carefully, and entirely on my terms. This evening, I am sitting on my new balcony, a cup of chamomile tea in my hands. The air is warm and the setting sun is painting the sky in glorious shades of pink and gold. My phone rings. It's Ben, the truck driver, calling to check in as he sometimes does. We talk for a few minutes, our conversation easy and warm, a friendship forged in a moment of crisis. After we hang up, I look out at the horizon. I am not a victim. I am not a vengeful matriarch. I am simply Eleanor Vance, a 70-year-old woman who was pushed to the edge and discovered she could fly. They thought they were taking my house, but what they really did was give me a home, one I built for myself, on a foundation of self-respect. And as the last sliver of sun disappears, I smile. I am finally completely blessedly free.